Today we're going to be talking about typography, and this is a subject that I really enjoy, but I'll try not to geek out too much and give you too much detail. But basically, typography, this is how we choose what we want our words to look like on our web page. Well, because we're talking about web pages in particular, but of course you could also talk about typography in for books or for magazines, but we'll be talking about it in regards to web design. So how do I make my words look how I want them to look? How do I provide a good user experience on my website? And how do I provide good user interface? So it's easy for users to do what I want them to do when they see my words and to get the right feelings for the user experience. And so let's talk about how do we use types or fonts in order to do this. So first of all, just notice that on this slide I just have the one word, and I have a easy to read font here, and so I just have the word typography, and it's something that you could read quickly while I'm talking, and you're not going to puzzle over it or be confused about what I'm saying. It's great for a business or academic type of presentation, but I could have chosen a different font to write that word. So if you look here, there are all different ways I could have put it. Some are easier to read, some are less easier to read, some are give more of a feeling to it, maybe elegance here, but they can give this different feeling. So we can definitely use what font or type we use to make a difference on our web page. Let me give you another example. So here I have a thought, you'll never be alone, and perhaps I'm wanting this to be comforting, or I want people to just focus on reading the sentence. But if I change the font I use, I could make this, instead of just kind of simple, I could make it more elaborate, more kind of a declaration of love, some kind of grand romance by using this kind of script. Or I could make it kind of cutesy. You'll never be alone. Or I could make it scary. You'll never be alone. That font that I choose here helps to convey messages. So it's something that we need to think about and choose wisely. All right, first thing we're going to talk about today are the types of type, or the types of fonts. We're going to be talking about 4 basic fonts: serif, sans serif, script, and decorative fonts. So let's start out by talking about serif fonts. Now, serif fonts, the word serif means feet in French, so that's where that word serif comes from. So the letters have feet to them. And if you look here, we have like the F, we have this little foot on the I, on the R, and even at the base of this S, little feet. And we also have a movement of thick to thin transitions. So let me just show you this quick visual here. So on some fonts we have a diagonal stress from thin edge to thin edge, and then these are thick to thick. This is also diagonal, but we can have a vertical stress or a horizontal stress. These are all things that we would find in a serif font. So thick and thin transitions, as well as feet. There are 3 different types of serif fonts: old style, modern, and slab serif. And one thing I want you to notice as I'm talking, that whenever I have a slide here that's talking about a type of font like a serif, I'm going to tell you what the name of that font is. So what I've used here is Times. So that's the font that I've used here, which is a serif font. Now let's go in and talking about old style first. And old style, and on this I'm using Palantino. This is the first style of serif fonts that was developed, and it's used for extensive body copy. So if you have a lot of information that people need to read, we're going to use an old style font. So an example of that is Palantino, but other examples would be Gaudi, Times, Baskerville, Garamond. So if I'm going to write a lot of text myself, my old favorite used to be a Garamond, and I used it for probably 15, 20 years on a lot of the assignments that I created for students because it's easy to read, but also I thought it looked a little bit more elegant than some of the other ones. Then let's talk about a modern serif font. And here where I wrote modern, that is in Onyx. So this is a second type of serif font, and it's very striking. This has that vertical stress, so the thin edge to thin edge is going to be up and down. It's not as readable as old style, and the basic convention in web design is don't use this for a lot of text. You could use it for heading, you could use it for subheads, but you wouldn't want to use it for a lot of things that people are going to read. It's kind of considered to be elegant. So that's Onyx up here, then we have Bodani, Times, Bold, and again Onyx. So those are examples. Third type of serif is the slab serif. And here I have Century School Book is what I've written slab serif in. So this is a third type, and this is also high on the readability scale. So similar to the first type that we saw, that if you're going to have a lot of text, this is a good one to use. And it's called Century School Book because really this was a type of font that was developed for academic books for kids. So what we have are some fattened letters, and there is a vertical stress as well with this one. And we have Century School Book, Rockwell, and Courier New. These are examples of a slab serif font. All right, so that's the first type, serif fonts. Those are fonts with feet, and we just looked at then 3 subtypes. Next, we're going to talk about sans serif fonts. And sans serif means without feet. And so no longer do we have little feet at the bottom. These ones don't have it, so without feet. And this is Bauhaus 93 with that heading. And so this is great for using for headlines. It's nice, easy to read, and some of your sans serifs are going to be a little bit fancier than others. So Bauhaus is a fancier one, but there are others that are a little bit more traditional. But something like that would be great for a headline. It has a large X height, so the letters are tall, basically. And if we're getting to the more decorative one like this, we actually don't use it for a lot of text because it is difficult to read. But there are others, more traditional ones. So here we see Optima, Futura, Euphemia, Helvetica New. And if you work in advertising, Helvetica New is probably one of the most popular fonts to use. This one is something you can use for a significant amount of body copy. So you can use that for a lot of text. You could use Gil Sans, and Trebuchet is also one that you can use for a lot of body copy. Comic Sans, this is one I like people to stay away from. It's supposed to kind of look like maybe a 10-year-old's handwriting or what you do in a comic book, and I say just say no to Comic Sans. There are very few situations where it's appropriate, so kind of take it out of your typography toolbox. All right, next one, script. So a script, so this is our third, so we've talked about serif fonts, sans serif fonts, and now we're looking at script fonts. And this one is using Vivaldi. So these are supposed to look like calligraphy, and it really can be beautiful if it's on a large scale and it only is 1 or 2 words, very limited amount of information to read because it is difficult to read. So never use it for a large amount of text. It just needs to be some type of of either heading, subhead, accent, something that you're saving it for when you need to have a feeling. All right, so examples: Lucida calligraphy, brush script, Kunstler script, Savoy, and Snell roundhand. These are all examples. Some are easier to read than others, but still you use them carefully. Then we have our fourth type. So we've had serif, sans serif, script, and now fourth, decorative fonts. And here we have Jokerman is what I have this one written in. It's noticeable, draws people's attention, but it has a poor readability standard, so we only, again, want to use it for one or two words. We want to use it to get attention, create that look, kind of get user experience here. We don't want to overuse it. We certainly cannot use it for a whole set of body copy, like for a paragraph. No, it needs to be used very, very sparingly. So, but it is good for trying to get that user experience, for people to understand what they're supposed to feel when they're on your page. Decorative fonts can really help. So here are some examples: Dreaming Out Loud, Chillers. Chillers, this is one I used back towards the beginning when I said You'll Never Be Alone, and that was kind of the scary one that was using chillers. Blackadder, this kind of looks like what a pirate ship writing would be. Gigi, kind of girly, curly. Stencils, and then you get some of the funny ones. You like Wingdings, like who knows what on earth that says, but it is a font. All right, so we are going to want to use, you're going to need to choose what fonts you want to use in your website. And in general, we're going to be picking 2 fonts overall. Generally, we want to have 2 fonts that will complement each other. And we'll talk more about this in a little bit. But I want to bring a couple things to your attention. First is that we want to use Google Fonts. All right, so I'm at the site fonts.google.com, but also if you just do a Google search and you just say Google Fonts, it will you can get a link that will bring you here. All right, so you can, as we get here, just make sure that you have this top A selected for that you're going to be doing search for fonts, because there are other things you can search, but we just want fonts. So if you know of a font and you want to see if it's a Google font, we can type it in here and see what it does. And so Poppins is indeed a Google font. And let's see, is this a serif or a sans serif font? Does it have feet? And no, it does not have feet, so it is a sans serif font. So we can search for individual fonts in here. Now you might ask, why are we going to Google Fonts to look for fonts? Because I can just find fonts in Figma, and that just saves a lot of time to just look at the fonts at Figma. So if we're in Figma here, and I have, I have my something selected. I can see this font is called Catamaran. I can change it. So you think, why don't I just do it in here? Well, the problem is that Adobe or Figma, different companies like them, have fonts that are not used in WordPress. And so what I want you to do is pick out fonts that you can actually use in your WordPress website. And so Google Fonts, almost always, if you can find it in Google Fonts, then it will be available on WordPress. It means that this font can be used, can be easily read by people. Fonts that aren't in WordPress are going to be ones that are more difficult, that might have a harder time with, basically from a back-end coding perspective, of being properly displayed on your web page. So that's why we want to use Google Fonts, not just pick a font in Figma. All right, but we can do filters here. So if I do a filter, I can type a word that, let's say I want to see what the word hello looks like. And I can scroll down and choose some filters. It will automatically be filtering out to filter English fonts in English, but you can choose other languages if you click on here. And let's just say we want to pick a serif font. We want to see what fonts are available that would be easy to read. All right. There are other things we could choose, but let's just go simple and do a nice serif font. And then it'll come here and it will show me fonts and what hello would look like in that font. And so I can then go through and say, what do I like? What would be good for user interface? What would be easy for people to read? And then also for user experience. What's going to give across my tone? Because obviously if you pick this one, it's going to be very different. So if you pick Danfo, very different feeling than if you pick Cormorant Garamond. So you have to take a look at all of these things and choose what fonts you're going to use. All right, so let's move away from that, and we are going to go on to a new slide here. And so again, just emphasizing that WordPress uses Google Fonts. Now, every now and then you may have found a font that you absolutely love, or it's one that you have to use somehow. And let me tell you what you can do in that case when it's not a Google font. First of all, there is a website, What Font Is This? And I'm going to pull it up right now. I think I'm going to pull it up. It's going to make me go through all. Okay. It didn't bring it up, but let's see. All right, there it goes. All right, so let's say, for instance, that I have this particular style guide, and I have traditional fonts that are Google fonts, but I have this one font that is the signature for a business. And so if we look at the signature, the business already uses this font. So I need something somewhere that will kind of echo this if it's not in Google. And this font is called Miyama. And if I go to here, Miyama, it tells me, sorry, we can't find that font. And so you have to think about then, what could I do in order to try to find a similar font? So I can have something that's similar to my business as an accent on my page. So what can we do? We're going to go to this website, What Font Is This? And then we are going to take a screenshot of the font that we like. And this is an example from a student project a few years ago. And she wanted to she's doing a page for Lee University's campus choir, and this is their logo. So she has to have something similar to this, but this particular font is called maybe Holland, something like that. But it wasn't a Google font, but she needed something similar to be able to make the rest of her page look cohesive. So we just took a screenshot of campus choir, of their logo. And if you don't know how to do screenshots, I do have an optional video that walks you through that process. All right, so we have that. And so let's give you the example how this works. So we're going to go to Font Finder. And first thing we're going to need to do is to click out of the little ad. So what font is this? And it will kind of walk us through it, but basically it's find any font from any image. So all we need to do is upload. All right, I am going to put my image in here. I can either drag and drop or browse by clicking, so that's easier to do when I'm making a video. And you'll notice the site has so many ads, but we're using it for free, so that's the price we pay. All right, first thing it wants to do is to crop the image. Just use one of the words. That's fine, we can do that. So I'm going to accept that crop and say next step. The next thing, it wants me to put a line between any letters that are are um, that are together, so it can see what where the cursive kind of lines are. So putting it between the A and the M, going to put it between the M and the P and the U and the S. Right, so we got some lines there, and we're going to go on to the next step. All right, now it needs me to confirm what it sees. Get rid of adds, and yes, this is a C. That is an A. This is an M, P, U, and it has no idea what that is. We're going to tell it it's an S. All right, next step. Did it take me to the next step? I think it's working. All right, so it's going to give me the first, let's see, it's going to give me what, the first 60 fonts matching the image I uploaded, what it thinks it could be. So the first one it suggests is significant OTF. And these ads are interfering so much. So that's the first one. Oh, goodness gracious, let's stop. And very similar one, Winsberg, OTF, Italian horse key, horse script rough. And look, that one wouldn't be too bad, really. I could probably use this on a headline, something if I, meet the singers or worship. I could use that one pretty easily. So I've gotten some of those fonts, and what I would then do is go back to Google Fonts and then put in the font that I just saw there and make sure that it's something that is a Google font. So that's how I would find a new font. Okay, so now let's go off of there and let's continue with talking about fonts. Okay, so we've talked about the fact of what types of fonts there are, that you need to use a Google font, how to find your font on either font.google.com or going to something like Font Finder to find a similar font to one that you would like to use. And now we're going to move on to some other subjects when it comes to type. The next subject is readability. In general, serif fonts are considered easier to read than sans serif fonts. And we're not exactly sure, like there aren't exact precise studies of why they're easier to read, but we know they are in tests where people have to read and comprehend information and then they can do it faster with a serif font. And so we don't really know exactly why, but probably what a lot of researchers think is that after we're out of about third, fourth, fifth grade, we're not reading by phonics anymore, where we have to look at each exact word and sound out the whole word. So if we're going to look at a book and we read the word donkey, and when we're a kid, we start out, you kind of put your finger under it, donkey, and then you put it together so you're looking at every letter exactly. We don't do that after a while. We just kind of end up recognizing the shape of words. So if I'm reading now as an adult and I see the word donkey, my brain has noticed the D, the have a globe with an upward line, and at the end there is the Y with the downward line, and then there's the K in the middle, which is kind of large, and I don't have to see every single letter. My brain just fills in the blanks. It knows what to expect, and so it's easier to recognize words when they have the feet on it. It gives our brains more cues, essentially. And so just to give an example, I'm going to show you a slide, and things aren't spelled correctly in it, and that's really the point, is that it's purposefully misspelled. However, when I'm in class, I will usually ask a student to please read this. It's not going to be really easy, but I think you got it. But don't worry if you get things mixed up. So this is it. And so we have words here, but the letters are in the wrong place. But we can kind of read it anyways. According to a researcher at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be at the right place. The rest can be a total mess, and you can still read it without problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. And then this is what it really looks like. Now, is it work to read this? Yes, it's work, and we might get one or two things wrong, but we could still read it even though things are misspelled. And so basically, if you're going to have a lot of body copy, I would go with a sans serif. I would go with a serif font, because that is just easier for our brains to read. And I'm just, for when it comes to readability, just want to show you a couple different fonts and put them in a paragraph, and see how it would feel if you had to read a whole web page with one of these fonts. The Bauhaus 93, look at that. I mean, get your attention. It's striking. But that S, if you have to use it a lot, it really, this does give me a headache. Susie sells, she sells by the seashore. And it's work, and I don't like this for a large block of text. But then we go to Garamond, and we can read it easily. We don't have to effort on it, just focus. And Garamond was specifically designed in the printing world with books for easy reading. Now we look at a Lucida handwriting, which is one of our script fonts. And it used to be one of my favorite fonts. I can't really say it is anymore, but it's difficult to read for more than just a real short burst. So I also get frustrated with this one, and I hate if a student tries to turn in like a paper in a script font. Oh my goodness, that's just, I'll just send it back and ask them to change it to a readable font. And Apple Casual, at first it looks like it should be easy to read, but it really isn't, because there's some kind of odd quirks with some of the letters, and you're kind of reading it going a little bit, your eyes going up and down a little bit, because there are different line heights, X heights for each letter. And so although if I'm choosing it in a font finder, Apple Casual might look like it's a good sans serif, it's actually not. So sometimes we pick something, put it in a block of text, and figure out, does this work or not? All right, how many types, how many fonts can you use? And in general, we generally want to use more than one font, more than one type. We want to use two usually. And we want to make the two fonts that we choose different but complementary. So we can use one serif font and one sans serif font. We could use one decorative and one serif. We could use a sans serif and a script. So we want them to be different, not the same. So essentially, this means we don't want to generally use two sans serif fonts unless they're distinctly different. We don't want to use two decorative fonts. So we need to figure out what works. So I'm going to show you a graphic that comes from a book. Let's see, it's written by Robin Williams, who is not the actor that was like Aladdin and Genie. Robin Williams is a female graphic designer who wrote a number of good textbooks for non-designers, and this one I think she called the non-designers type book. And so this is from there. So here we have to make a decision. Do these contrast these two fonts together? Do they contrast or conflict? So we want contrast where they're two distinctly different fonts, but we want them to work together. We don't want them to fight each other, which would be the conflicting. When I'm in class, I have my students discuss this between each other and decide if they think each of these fonts are contrast, which is good. So does Fancy and Perfume, these two fonts, do they contrast or conflict? The second one, Extremely Good Dog Food, do these contrast or conflict? And make some decisions on which one they think it is and why they think that. All right, moving on now to talk about reverse type. Reverse type is the opposite of what we see with most, like if you're going to type out a paper or print out a paper, usually we have white paper and we have a black type on it, and that's what is our regular type. Reverse type is when it's the opposite. So we have a black or dark background and then we have a light colored type. And you'll find this is kind of common on websites. However, we have to be careful that we don't do too much of it. We can use it on some rows or some columns, but it shouldn't usually be the entire web page because it is a nice effect, but it has to be in the small doses. So one of the reasons of this is that reverse type appears smaller to the eye, even though it's not. And if we have a thin type, then it can actually get lost and almost look like it doesn't have part of the letter. And so we have to be careful what we use in a reverse type. So generally, I would suggest using a sans serif font because it's on a serif font, the feet kind of bleed into the back and may become basically lost. We just don't see it, or it could become blurry, which makes it more work. One of the interesting things about reverse type, though, is it's really good in a low visibility situation. So if you know everyone's going to be looking at your website or a document and they're in a bright room and they're looking at something, actually reverse type is great for that because it jumps out. It doesn't get washed out like your regular type would be. So if you knew that your website was going to be viewed, let's say you're designing a website that's going to be used inside a catalog store. People will come in, look around, then they go on the computer and then they order what they're actually going to get there on the website, and it's bright lights everywhere. Well, then you might want to use reverse type for the entire thing because of that lighting situation. But in general, usually most situations we don't want to use reverse type too much. All right, what about whether you use capital letters, all caps, traditional punctuation, or just lowercase? So what should you use? And in general, we're going to say just use traditional punctuation for most websites. So use a capital letter at the beginning of a word, use capitals for proper names, use regular punctuation. Generally, we do not use all caps. Using all caps is a problem. It makes people work because we can't just see the shape of the letters as we can with upper and lower case, and so it makes us work harder. We don't want to, and it's very annoying. So we only use all caps if you do not want someone to read what you've written. If you have a section of your website and you're like, I have to put this statement here, but I really hope people don't read it, you could put it in all caps and they're likely to not read it. And you don't want to use title case. This last example here is title case, which is where you have every word capitalized. This is annoying as well. It's okay for a title, so you can use title case on a headline or a subhead. Yeah, cool, of course, use it. That's a title. Basically, a heading or a subhead is a title. But don't use it in your body copy. That I'll immediately call you out because, again, from that user experience, you're going to annoy people if you do this because it makes it hard. So Again, user experience, we're not going to generally use all caps or title case. And we generally don't use all lowercase either unless you have a specific purpose for doing so. I have had one or two students who are creating websites for particular age groups, like one was a preteen Bible study thing, and she did go with all lowercase. And it did lead to kind of a cutesy feeling, and it seemed appropriate with that particular purpose of the website and the audience she was trying to reach, but there are just very few websites that all lowercase is going to work. Okay, I feel like we've already done this. Each font creates different feelings. We've done that. Now there is a quiz that is in Moodle. I think it's called H5P Quiz Do's and Don'ts. And in class, I do this out loud with my students. But for an online class, this is something that you do in Moodle. And you'll only be graded on completing the activity, not whether or not you got it right. Next topic to talk about is what size font should you be using. Essentially, we say, your font needs to be as big as it needs to be. You want it to be large enough so that people can comfortably read it, and you want it to be small enough so that it's not hard work for them to read it. And if we're talking body copy, probably the smallest your font should be is 16 points, but 21 points would really be the preferred. 20 or 21 would be that preferred amount of text size. So you can do 16, but I would actually recommend 20 to 21. Now, when it comes to your headlines, your headings, subheads, this is kind of up to you. I've easily had people do 60-point heading, 40-point subheads, and that's okay. So it really, it varies based on your actual fonts. But again, the idea, the size should make it as easy as possible for people to read what's on your website. There's also an idea of line length, that we don't want to have lines that are too long. We want to have a line length that's comfortable for reading. And so essentially, we don't want to have writing that would start all the way over on the left side of the web page and then have like 100 words all the way across to the right side of the web page. So like 100 words, maybe that would be like 400 characters. So we don't want that. We need to have lines that are more like 45 to 75 characters per line. So that might be, somewhere between 6 to 10 words. So 66 characters is kind of that perfect amount, but there are times when you can have shorter line lengths. So if you have a heading, if you have a caption, if you have a bulleted list, of course we can have very short lines. This is more really looking at body copy, that main text that we want people to be reading. And so this means we generally don't like a whole row of writing. So if we have text that people are going to read, we often break it up into a row that has 2 columns, and we have writing in different containers so it's easy for people to read. Let's also talk about justification. This is the position of our sentences, and usually when it comes to justification, we can have a sentence that's left justified, and this is what we have here. It's justified to the left, so it begins here. Everything begins at the same place. And if it were right justified, everything would line up here. And we could have centered where it's centered here. And in general, we could also, the other thing is we could also have both right and left justified, so that it's like a a square or a rectangle, and it is very orderly. Okay, but just in general, when it comes to justification, we want your copy to be easy for people to read. And so almost always we're going to either be using left justified or fully justified, which is left and right justification. Again, to make things easy to read and make it neat and orderly. And pretty much I avoid center justified margins, except perhaps on a heading. Or maybe if I have a quote, maybe I'll use center justification, but I would never use center justification when it comes to body copy. And let's see if I can pull up Figma. If I can pull up a Figma for you real quick. And let's just gonna take a look at what we have here. And let's see, let's look at this. And so what you see here is this particular section here is right justified, and he put this justification here because this is originally a student design site. He put this justification here so that it would match this this line on the photo, that they're close together, and that would have a nice look to it. Now he could have made other choices here. He could have done the left justified, and that looks fine too. I would not object to that at all. And this would be the center justified. And in general, this just, it's sloppy. It's more work to read it. So it's something that we really don't want to do. And let's see if we can get, let me remember, I have to think I go here to do the, to have both ends justified. And so it's both right and left. And this one, it looks fine. So I would be happy with this justification as well. So this student could have had great choices there. Let's look at this one though. This one looks, I think, pretty bad. Center justified, of course, I don't usually like it, but and here, if we had done the right justified, it wouldn't make sense. That would look bad. And here, that looks fine. And let's do the both justified, and let's see. Yeah, it's okay. It's fine. But every now and then when we do a justification, sometimes it leaves really odd spacing, and where really large spacing in between some words, and so we want to avoid where it looks odd. All right, so that's justification. All right, let's talk color. And here I'd say use colored text sparingly. It's fine for headlines, for buttons, the click me buttons, or a link, like if you have a link to another website and you have it in blue, yeah, that's fine. That's a way to visually let people know that it's a link. But I would not use this for your main body copy, so use it sparingly. Now, a couple notes about accessibility. Accessibility is making sure that our websites are compatible for anyone to be able to kind of access and enjoy it. So we think about things such as somebody who has lower vision and whether or not they could read what's on our page if they have vision that's not great. So this is where we go. We want it large enough. And here, I mean, like I'm not all that old, but I do have 3 grown children, so I'm not all that young either. But sometimes I'll get a student website turned in, and I can't read it when it's at a normal resolution. And my eyesight's not that bad. I have glasses, but you know what? They're not very strong glasses. And so I'll point this out to the student that it's really small and it's not accessible. And they'll just like, well, just zoom in. I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. But is that really what you expect somebody to come on your website and have to zoom in to be able to read the dumb thing? No, we're trying to give a good user experience. And there are a lot of things when it comes to accessibility, and there is a great place to get some more ideas and information, the U.S. Web Design Standards. And so that is something that you can take a look at. Here, I brought up those web design standard, and so it will give you ideas again, so like text alignment, the line length again, talk about some of the things I've talked about here, line height, how much white space or negative space you should have in between items, talks about fonts, how far apart your letters should be. So, all sorts of great ideas. And it has a number of fonts that are that were designed for accessibility to make your website as easy to read and understand. So this is a great resource. It's a government site, so it's free, and just a lot of things that you could take a look at. So, anyways, I do recommend taking a look at that if you know you're going to have an audience that might have some lower visibility. Also, we talk about accessibility when it comes to color theory, and I'll show you other sites in which we can get information in that lecture about choosing colors that are accessible for everyone. All right, so now you get to choose your fonts. Pick 2 fonts and make sure that they contrast and do not conflict. And keep all these other things in mind as you start to lay out your home page and your about page in Figma. Can't wait to see what you do.